Okay, now we're ready for lesson number 7, which is part 2 of the clown pants. So you should have 2 pieces that look just like this, kind of a weird U at the top rectangle. All right, and then we're going to go back to our directions. And the instructions say with right sides together, again, pin the center seam matching the inner leg seams and the notches, and then stitch it. Again, the 5/8 inch seam allowance. And then to reinforce seam, stitch again over the first stitching. That is because that's the most likely place that the garment will fail, is the crotch seam. So it's going to look like this. We're going to lay right sides together and we're going to pin along the U, and then we're going to stitch right along that U also. So we're going to practice doing a curved seam. You have to pay special attention here where you have your seams pressed open, because you don't want it to flip over, especially on the bottom side where you can't see when you're stitching. You want to make sure that you pin those, especially when in the position you want them, so one doesn't flip over. Okay, and so go ahead and pin those together and we'll check. So before I pin, I wanted to point out, when you have right sides together, so right side, put them together, one on top of the other, you'll see that the notches match up. So this one has 3 notches and this one has 3 notches. And then the other side only has 2. So you'll have things all pieced together if your notches match. Okay, so we're gonna line those notches up, pin around, and then we're gonna stitch. So go ahead and pin those 2 together. All right, here I have it all pinned up, and you can see where I've got the seam pressed open. I pinned down both sides of that flap just to make sure, when I'm stitching across, it doesn't fold over like this, and especially it doesn't fold over underneath so that it's too bulky. Okay, this one, doing it like this kind of reduces the bulk, having the seam pressed open. Okay, now we get it set up on the machine. Okay, we're going to start off the same way with the little reverse stitch, 3/4 stitches backwards, and then forward all the way around. When you hit the curve, it's kind of funny to go around a curve because you're not going to be watching the needle as much as you're going to be watching that line. So it's not like driving where you're looking way down the road. You're not even really looking where the needle is. You're looking at this edge line. And just going maybe even like 3/4 stitches at a time. Make sure you're staying nice and centered around that line, and just go little by little. So here's that tricky part where we're going over that pressed seam. And what I did was I advanced my needle manually. You know how you can do that on the other side, so that my needle was stuck in the fabric, and then I lifted my presser foot, I lifted my foot, and I just made sure that that little flap was flat, and then set it back down, so that way I know that underneath side is going to be okay. And this is also what I was talking about before, where you're looking at the intersection of like where the needle meets this 5/8 inch marker. So you're not looking way down here, you're not looking way over here, you're not even looking at the needle, you're looking at that where that edge piece connects, or where it sits relative to the 5/8 inch line. And after I stitch, I always do like the little visual inspection. I realized my cutting was, I don't know, I goofed somehow with my cutting, and one of my pieces is kind of off, so I'm just going to fudge it and trim this off and cut the other side to match, and hope for the best in the end. And same thing at the bottom. So it's always nice to make it a little extra long to account for mistakes in my cutting. I don't know what I did wrong, but something funny happened with my pattern cutting. All right, and then we're going to repeat the process of pressing the seam open. It's a little tricky around this part, so you just do it little by little, but make sure you kind of give each side a tug. Even while you're pressing it, you can tug on the sides to make sure it's a nice crisp edge. Before you do that, do the second row of stitching along that same seam line, then press it open. All right, so after the ironing, we have sort of like this T in the middle where this was the original inner thigh seam, and then this one was the kind of front to back seam. I pressed it the best I could around that inside. And then we are off to part 3 of the clown pants, and that is lesson number 8.